How do you make comics without all the frustration, without feeling lousy and inadequate all the time? Join me, Jess Rolifson,
And me, Tom Hart.
on the Terrible Anvil. Each week, we build community and shift our mindset about what it means to make comics and art. We're working through the whole process, one piece at a time, turning our suffering and angst into fun and glee. Join us at sawcomics.org. Yay! Guess what? It's the Terrible Anvil again, and it's episode 10, 1-0. Amazing.
All
We're
right.
in a couple digits now, so you know we're not messing around. We're live streaming this to YouTube, so if you're wandering across our YouTube right now, it's a pleasure. Thanks for being here. I'm here with my mysterious co-host,
Tom Hart.
who is also, we're both cartoonists. We live
What's
virtually at the Sequential Artists Workshop if this is your first time. And
your
we're doing
name?
this podcast called The Terrible Anvil, and it's about comics, how to make comics, how to feel better about the bad parts about making art and money and feeling okay. Uh, but mostly, yeah, how to feel good
And what's
as
your
much
name?
as possible.
Introduce.
My, did I not say my name? My name is Jess Rolifson. I'm your host. This is not NPR, but we're happy to see you. So this episode 10, we're talking about something cool that Tom said a few episodes ago about how a lot of the maybe negative feelings we have when we're making comics is born by something called expectations. Are they great expectations or just regular? We don't
Either,
know.
either way, I have one piece of advice, and then we can go home.
Tell us
And
your advice and we'll just end the call. It'll be like a 4-minute podcast.
lower them. That's the advice.
Lower them.
Lower
Oh
your
my
expectations. No, but how do you want to enter into this topic? Because there's a lot of ways to talk about. I presume we're talking about internal expectations, the expectations we put on ourselves when we start an art project or something.
Yeah, I think that presumption is accurate. Also, real talk. I'm making a book. It's called The Bootlegger's Guide to Comics, and we're sort of beta testing topics in the book. And I wrote 3 exceedingly mysterious notes to myself that I don't understand and mashed them together with Tom's idea of expectations, and it kind of works. So these are the 3 mysterious things. Are you ready? The first one is time is the medium of possibility. And I don't know if that was a 2 a.m. thought or if I read it somewhere on the internet and I think it's mine now. So if you're the original source, thank you. And I was like, what does that mean? So I think that means give yourself more time. The second idea is inevitability versus possibility, which I know is my idea because it doesn't make any sense. So I was like, what does this mean? I think that means don't mandate results before, during, or after the work you're making. Inevitability versus possibility. A little hard to say. The third thing, it's okay. This is definitely a Jessism. It's okay to be ambitious, but normalize your mediocrity as well. So, are you mediocre? Hell yeah. Let's make some noise for mediocrity today. Um, I made some thumbnail drawings because I'm a professional cartoonist and I have a meeting with a real client later, and they are so ridiculous. And I didn't even I don't even really have a scanner. I took pictures with my phone and tarted them up in Photoshop and uploaded the files. And without flinching, sent them a Google Drive link. And I was like, here are the sketches in progress. I didn't apologize. And the editor got back and said, wow, these look really great. And I was like, I mean, I didn't like disagree. So we can have an internal dialogue about it. But anyway,
So
I can't believe it.
in
Yeah.
this instance, the normal expectation, which is like get a good high. First of all, do good thumbnails, which it sounds like you didn't do. You did mediocre thumbnails, right?
They were,
Okay.
I don't know. I
Good
mean,
scans, which you
good
didn't
is
do.
very wiggly. Like, how do we define good? But I will say mediocrity is something I can count on. It is always present in my work. So rather than like really wanting and desiring greatness, I'm counting on mediocrity. I'm like, it's an ingredient I can use. It's always in the pantry. And I feel like I don't think we do that enough. Like, and mediocre doesn't, I mean, maybe it's the wrong word, but I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for what our baseline is. Like, I think we're like, when I turn into Alan Moore with my writing skills and Mike Mignola with my inking skills, then I will be able to finish the comic of my dreams. I'm like, you are the dream right now. Maybe your dream's a little nightmare around the edges. But having a really wonky first draft is also powerful. So I think in my advice, all this rambling to say, I think um, expect the weirdness, the things not to go right, but not in like a cynical way, like, oh, of course, this always happens. I mean, you could do that, but that's not going to help. But if you're like, oh, there it is, that really weird hand I can't seem to draw, I wonder how much more time I should spend on this before I move along to some other thing I can't draw the way that I think I want to.
But a client does have some expectations that you have to meet, right? You can't, presumably you can't hand it in and say, yeah, I don't know how to draw hands, so I just drew tentacles. They're going to be like, this is a comic about an emergency room and our doctors need to have hands, right?
That's true. Yeah, I
So
think
tell me how to
there's
manage.
yeah, expectations. Like sometimes you won't know the expectations of other people until you collaborate a little bit more. And I think when people collaborate on both sides of the table, creators and I guess commissioners of creative works, um, the good ones, I think most people like leave room. Like I think the thing uh, maybe being accountable is more important than being very good at everything you do. If you say you're going to show up on a day with a certain amount of work, they didn't say it's supposed to look awesome, but they did say you have to turn the work in. So it's also like if it's a first draft, I think there's a lot of room, at least when you're collaborating with other people. They're there to like provide insight while the work is in progress, which is a very sacred space. It's a little scary. It's also like awkward and strange because you don't have a full handle on it right away. You're still kind of working in it. So to invite people into the feels like you're inviting them into the steam room of the ship or something. Like, here we are. It's going. It's like really loud and messy in there. But but I think if you have a loose first draft, even if it is a little like weird or even inaccurate, uh, there are collaborators there that can offer suggestions. Oh, this isn't working. You probably should draw hands. If you can't draw hands and you're more of a tentacles person, maybe we could zoom in on the face. You seem to be great at those. So I think having good collaborators that will help you get out of jams is good too. But yeah, expectations. So I expected well, one expectation that I seem to encounter immediately when I sit down to make comics is this won't take that long. And then I'm like, I should have given myself more time. I've never like, wow, I gave myself too much time on this. And I definitely didn't finish as much as I had hoped for my meeting today. So that is one expectation.
Well,
But yeah, lowering them, but I still feel good. Yeah, I think the other thing, Tom, can you tell me, and I don't know the answer, what is the difference between an expectation and a goal?
well, I mean, I don't know. I think those are both wiggly terms, and we might define them for ourselves, right? I think the kinds of expectations we're talking about are the kinds that don't really recognize who we are, what we're capable of, and what our goals really are, actually. Um, and so we have all these mixed up expectations, which usually come from comparing ourselves to others. Our goals, I don't know, I feel like I'm not really sure, but I think our goals are something we have a little more control of, but we still often need to check them with what's realistic.
Yeah. Yeah, so goals being unrealistic might be expectations. I put that. There's something really good I read. Like an expectation is like a pre-made resentment or something. Like if you expect this, I'm paraphrasing, and I feel like I've seen it and heard it before, but yeah, like if it doesn't go the way you think you will, and it goes the way that it goes, there are lots of different opportunities there to plan for next time. You can beat yourself up. But at a certain point, you have to reckon with your abilities in the present with like wanting to accomplish and get to your goal. Like it's not exactly going to look the way you want, but I don't know. I feel like I'm steeping this whole conversation in like sadness by being like, it's just not going to go the way you think it will. Okay. It might go even better. That's a
Well,
possibility. If
yeah,
you're
you know,
a glass half empty person.
let's get down. I mean, I always try to bring it as I try to draw it out as much as possible or pull back as much as possible. Like, what's a really good goal? And to me, a really good goal of what we're doing, because this is ostensibly a comic, I mean, a podcast about comics and stuff. A really good goal to me is sharing a story with somebody. Sort of that's the end. And then or maybe sharing a frame of mind with somebody, right? So like maybe it's a mixture of both. Um, and so that's the real goal. And then but we get caught up and we lose track of that goal, and we think our real goal is to make a book just like Alison Bechdel, or our real goal is to get on fresh air, or whatever. We have other goals which are just kind of full of clutter and mixed up. But the real goal should be like to share something with somebody, and to like maybe improve our self-esteem by like expanding who we are when we accomplish something. I think those are reasonable, fun, achievable, and celebratory goals, or goals worthy of celebration. Anyway, and then so
And
what I'm
and they're goals that aren't like completely locked into like a final
right.
endpoint. It's like maybe this will start a conversation with somebody. Oh, I wonder what I'll learn about myself. And I mean, I don't think that way when I'm starting a project. I'm just like, I'm doing this. It's like getting on a bike. I'm like, here I go. And also like the idea of like overthinking something before you do it. Most of us, depending on our levels of neuroses. Don't overthink doing the dishes, going for a walk to the post office. When you get back home, you're like, I dropped that letter off. I feel accomplished. But when we make art, we're like, I don't know, it didn't go the way I thought it would. This isn't very great. There's this inner uh, conversation that tends sometimes to be critical, and a walk is a walk. A you know you bake brownies or cornbread and it comes out and it's mostly edible, you're like, great. Awesome. I have food now. I'm so excited. I made it myself. There's like this lack of a moment of pride or joy that I feel like maybe we can invite back in. Not maybe I'm more cynical than I think I am.
No, no, pride and joy are great outcomes, and the expectations I was talking about when we were talking a few episodes ago are the ones that sort of kind of get in the way of that, and they are the expectations of comparing ourselves to others. Look, I think, you know, I I think it's true that like never in the history of humankind have we had such a bounty of art tools. Like anybody, more than ever, and it's probably going to be more true in the future, but more than ever, you can make things, art projects, whatever we want to call them, songs, movies, comics. There's just 20, there's, 100 others. And we can, and it's so easy, and it should be fun. Those kinds of things should be fun. Um, and so that's what our goal is, as like, here at Saw is like, what we're trying to do is like help people find their way to sort of finished things they can call finished, that reflect who they are and are shared with others and didn't make them feel bad. To go back to our tagline over and over and over again.
I also wonder, what are the expectations of other people on our work?
Mm-hmm.
Like here at Saw, we share our work on the Mighty Network some of the time, either in a classroom setting or the public feed that's absolutely free. You can just wander over there and post to your heart's desire. Um, and some people we have like a heart button and there's a space to leave comments. And some people will solicit, does this look weird? Or I finished this zine, or here's my book and here's my book launch event, things like that. there's different levels of gloating or or joy or lack of that. Lots of different energies there. Like I guess I expect when I share work to have a conversation about it, but it doesn't have to be with a million people. But what's really exciting in terms of expectations, I don't want to talk too negatively about the master's program I was in because I was very lucky to get into it, and I'm very grateful I got the opportunity to go. But I'm used to hanging out with artists. If I hang out with any other humans, I usually I'm used to hang out with my cat, if I'm being honest. But when I hang out with other people, they were visual people. And it felt like we were always gathering around art the way a bunch of like mechanics would gather around an engine to listen to it. Be like, oh, what is that noise? Yeah, it sounds pretty good. What if we tinker with this? Like just a little bit of fine tuning and curiosity and like a joyful engagement with the mystery of making art itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't thinking about any of this consciously. We're just like happy to be gathering around and talking about things. Um, and then I got into a particular room full of a particular group of artists that were writers, and that was not the experience. There was not nearly as the same level of creativity, or not. It's not that it wasn't creative. It was there was definitely a lack of curiosity and possibility. So sometimes, if your expectations are open ended and steeped more in possibility than the inevitability, like that you're going to fail or that it won't be good or that I mean, if I fold any kind of idea of inevitability into my work, it's like I know this is probably going to look a little weird and a little silly, and I kind of look forward to that. I'm like, how weird is it going to look? I mean, I will say sometimes I draw something and I'm like, no, and erase, 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 and I draw it. I'm like, that's not it either, and it is a frustrating experience. But if you move a little bit faster than the frustration and just get like, what should I put there, or that'll go there and that'll go there, it feels more like um, a jigsaw puzzle experience. I'm not even a puzzles person, but a pleasant hobby.
There's two things I want to comment on. One is real short, so I'll do that one first, and then the other is about school. The first is that you mentioned, drawing something and erasing it, and drawing something and erasing it. And one expectation I've always had as a cartoonist, because I come from ever since being a child, I come from this sort of lineage of comic strip cartoonists. Those were always my favorites. They were the one I trained myself on, and for a long time. And there's the sort of the standard that I think of, like with Charles Schulz, who is like the only person who could ever draw Charlie Brown, but drew it the same over and over and over and over and over again. Anyone else who draws Charlie Brown, it looks weird. And it's because those proportions are so perfect, and somehow it came out natural and perfect for him every time. And so I figured, well, once I had enough training, I'll have a character that I can do that with. I drew my character Hutch Owen tens of thousands of times, never drew it the same way twice. I could never figure out what the hell it looked like. And that expectation of I should be able to reproduce this because I'm a quote cartoonist. I was always faltering on my own expectations. Eventually, like, in my 40s, I had to be like, well, that was the wrong expectation. The particular way I cartoon is different, and I had to be okay with that, but I wasn't for years. Anyway, that's just one thing. That's just one way I had to personally realize, like, I wasn't going to step into this exact same path as my idols, and the people I admired. The other thing I was going to say is just about schooling, what you were talking about. I don't know about that MFA program in particular, but schools have changed a lot in the last 10 to 20 years in that, especially like cartooning schools, but maybe even MFA programs and things, in that there were a lot of expectations that when you were done with the program, you would be able to get a job, or you would be able to get published, which people thought was a job, but really isn't. And I think that's changing. It's definitely changing. And so people wind up in art schools because they want to make art, and somehow they have $30,000 a year or whatever to spend on it. But they wind up in art schools because they want to make art, which is cool, except a lot of the old guard teachers are still you're not going to be able to get a job when you get out of here. You don't have the skills, or this isn't the right content, or et cetera, et cetera. So when so in your MFA program, if they're not very, I don't know, but if they're not very curious or creative, it might be because they have the mindset of like, could this possibly get published, and would it get published before I get published? And if so, I'm gonna, there might be some competition. Does any of
Yeah,
that
I
make
don't,
sense?
it was weird. Definitely like, the, yeah, higher education, development of art skills, even like, undergraduate college level of visual art or creative writing. I can't speak to undergrad creative writing, but I did go to college for visual art, as my undergrad, and then a very brief master's program in, creative writing. And, in both of those scenarios, I went to a few different colleges for my undergrad. I transferred, but it was cost prohibitive. I was able to get a scholarship. I have $9,000 left on my student loan if anyone wants to just pay it off for me. Biden won't do it. No offense, nothing political here, but I've had these loans. They're like old enough to smoke cigarettes, so these loans are so old. They're from the early aughts. But anyway, that was how I was able to go to undergrad, and then grad school, I was able to get into what they were calling a fully funded program. What it meant is that they didn't charge tuition, but that the stipend was exceedingly petite for the cost of living, where the program was located. So it was true that it was free in quotes, but it was expensive. So I kind of thought, oh, everyone in the program is going to be like me and kind of, humble means financially, and I don't think that was true. I think it attracted a lot of people who had a lot of free time and weren't worried about a job and might not have had one before. And I was like, oh, what? Like, this is weird. So I know we weren't really talking about that, but you were talking about, art school tuition being like 30K. It's like easily over 60K now. It's really expensive. I didn't pay that much. I got a sweet deal, but it's still too much money. So
But
come
what
to
were the
Saw where it's
expectations?
way cheaper. Plug, 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 plug.
What were the expectations of your fellow students?
I think I just assumed that they were going to be like pleasant. It was after the pandemic. I also thought like we were all going to be way nicer if we survived. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I mean, I didn't go into the pandemic thinking like things were going to be great, but I was like, wow, this is really hard. I think after this we'll all feel like we came out the other side, like we feel better. And I was like, oh, I think I just had this, idea that I'd be in a room full of, people that were, just curious and open-minded. And I don't know, I think they were, but they also, I don't know, they wrote a lot of stuff that was dark, and it felt abusive to read at times. I was like, why am I reading this? And it just, I don't know how to describe it. It was very strange. It was like a really weird experience. Like I've read like dark stuff in comics before, but I don't know how to describe this stuff. I feel like it was, the best way I can describe it is like if you see a child might be like just learning their words, that they take like two Barbies and they like smash them together. It felt like that, like violence. I was like, ah, why? No.
Maybe they
Uh,
thought you were the intolerant, uncurious one
oh,
because you.
I'm sure they had a lot of thoughts about me. But yeah, I think like yeah, or like maybe I was censoring them. I don't really know, but I don't know. There was also like a pretty big age gap. I was a lot older than the people in the program, but I had taught people a little bit younger than some of the people in the program, and I just kind of thought like, oh, like what, what? Like I just never met anybody like that before. I don't know how to describe it.
And what again, what's the purpose of an MFA writing program? Is it I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to get a publishing gig, or I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to get a teaching gig, or I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to be a better writer?
Well, it's very likely you'll become a better writer and then you will lose all desire to write from the people I have talked to. Unfortunately, I didn't know that going in, but I didn't really, I had a desire to write, but I didn't have a writing practice. So I kind of thought, well, maybe if I go, I'll develop a practice. And
Mhm.
sometimes that happens for us in the graphic novel intensive or the year-long program. We establish a kind of routine and get enough people around and check in often enough, and it starts to, gain speed. But I think, for me, the thing that I was going for was I had already started teaching art school at the college level, but I had a bachelor's degree, and there are only a certain number of places you can teach at with quote unquote just a bachelor's degree. The terminal degree in visual arts is master's and not a PhD, so I thought, oh, I'll just get a master's. It just happened that the one I picked was 1 year long. Most of them are 2 to 4 years. It was also the only one I got accepted into, so I was like, "I guess I'll go to this one." Expectations, right? I thought I'll
Right,
go study, get a
right.
big stipend for 4 years. I was like, "Oh, I have 8 months to learn how to write fiction." So your mileage may vary is the classic thing with that. But I will say, I think there are things that I definitely have expectations in my career. I feel proud of the work I've done, but if I like look at my CV and write everything out, I apply to like fancy teaching gigs and things like that, and I rarely get interviews. And when I do, it goes well, but I don't necessarily get any job offers. So I think there's this idea that eventually you'll like plateau and have regular work and quote unquote make it, but a lot of the doors are closed for teachers, like in higher ed. There's just adjuncts and graduate students doing a lot of the work, and it's underpaid and undervalued. A lot of labor is so.
Mm.
So I thought like, oh, I'll get a really fancy job that's regular, but that hasn't happened. Like 2 weeks before a class runs, it's like, oh, we don't have enrollment, or it's basically teaching right now for me is a lot like freelancing, and so I kind of have to make peace with that. But I'm also I'm also thinking about like not completely stopping teaching, like, I'll still teach with SAW, but I sort of wonder if I should get out of academia because it's become borderline abusive. And my expectations are like, "This is yeah, I can do it," or, like, "Eventually things will get better," is the expectation, and that's true, but also you're like, "Oh, this isn't really nice, like, maybe I should get out of here." So I'm having, like, a "Oh, I wonder if I should leave," feeling about the accolades I thought I was promised. But Tom, you said you didn't finish your degree, right?
Yeah, I quit art school a long time ago. A
I should
long
have done
time
that. Tom, you're the smart one. I was like, I'll keep gathering my whatever. I feel like it
ago.
feels like a video game, you're like collecting certain items to level up.
It's a fun story. I don't know how, and it is related to expectations, but I don't know if it's related to the artistic and personal expectations we're talking about. But maybe it's worth telling because it definitely is about expectations, and that is that um I'll try and tell not the short version, not the long version, but maybe the short medium version, which is that um there was a show on Showtime in the 80s. Also, it was a movie called The Paper Chase, and it was all about law students getting a law degree. And it had John Houseman as the law and professor, right? It was very, very professorial and paternal. It's not patriarchal. It's not paternalistic. Anyway, one of them. Anyway, um, patrician. That's probably a better word. Anyway,
Ooh,
isn't it? Anyway,
I like it.
so
I'm gonna
but
Google that
anyway,
later.
these kids on this show had the most amazing intellectual life. And every episode, they were like wrestling with the idea of law and what they were learning. And Houseman and the other professors were like pushing them to learn more and like really wrestle with the meanings of their purpose, discovering their purpose in studying law and things like that. And I was like, I can't wait to go to college because that's what it's going to be like. And so I went to art school in New York City, and most of the students there wanted to, content warning, just guess. Most of the students there just wanted to draw the Hulk doing it with Wonder Woman. And that's all they wanted to do. And I was like,
Wow.
who are these people? I thought this was first of all, I thought this was a great art form that you would go to and Harvey Kurtzman taught there, and he's one of the he created our sense of humor as mid-century Americans to some degree. He's really a part of that, and there were other people who taught there, but nonetheless, the, everybody, they were just lunkheads all around me, and I said, I got to get out of here. So that was an expectation, but it wasn't an internal one. It was an external one, and it was right way wrong. So at least when I realized like that one wasn't being met, I got the hell out of there. So I don't know if that's a good model for I don't know if that's a good analog for what we need to do as creators or not. I haven't really thought it through. But oh, Anita says she went through the same thing. We'll have to talk at a later date. That's amazing. Um, so I want to talk about a couple other things though related to expectations, and I'm just going to throw out some ideas, and you can see if they're relevant. And one is about sales, and I say that because I just got back from MoCA, the festival in New York City, and I talked to one creator. I'm not going to name names, but I'll say this exact thing happened to me, so that's why I'm talking about it too. And I said, "Hey, congratulations on your book. It seems like it's doing really well." And they're like, "Oh, don't." I just asked the publisher. I said, I think I said, "How's it, how is it selling or something?" I usually wouldn't say selling, but how's it doing probably. And anyway, they were like, "Oh, I just asked the publisher," and they were shaking their head. And I was like, I know that feeling, right? You think it's gotten a little press, somebody's noticed, and then you just like somebody tells you like the secret, they give you the secret piece of paper with the numbers on it, and you're like, oh, really? So anyway, but like, these are still good works. We've done good things and we've shared our story, and some people have responded. And that was the last time I ever looked at any number like that at all. And I said, I'm never going to do that again. And I told that creator, and they already knew. I was like, don't look at the numbers. They were like, I know I shouldn't have done that. So I don't know if that tracks with some of these things about expectations you're thinking of.
I was also thinking about like I typed it out in the chat because I was like trying to form a thought while you were speaking about your experience at Mocha. How sometimes our expectations, I'm very like black and white, no cartooning, pun intended. I love color, by the way. We'll talk about color in a couple episodes. I know someone was asking, and I'm excited. I think it was Anita, maybe. Um, Sometimes, always, and never. Like sometimes you get published, sometimes you meet people that are wonderful, sometimes you meet people that are not your cup of tea. But I wouldn't say always it's raining, never things go my way, like or like if I do this, my expectation is that the results are guaranteed. So it's not only an expectation of a result, but also the consistency of the result. Like I think I was like, I'm gonna do this no matter what, this being like make my graphic novel, and it'll get published. And that's usually true, and that a lot of people self-publish, and that counts and that's real. So like you can set an intention and make it happen through the work you're doing. But also if your dream is like, I'd like to work with a publisher, there's like things you can do to like make the odds better, like figure out how to do a book proposal and see what publishers are accepting proposals and attempt to put your work out there. So if you do the work, that's always, the work is always guaranteed. There's steps you have to do, generally speaking. Um, but it's not guaranteed. Like obviously, I think most people know that. But I think there's people that go through, like one of the faculty I studied with in the MFA, I think her first novel was published when she was in her 50s, late 50s, maybe even. And she's been nominated for the National Book Award twice now, and she just keeps writing books, like, and she's taught all over the place. And she's made a creative life for herself. And from as me knowing her as like a student and relatively a stranger, she's doing fine. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. Like, I think there's expectations, and then there's also this idea that like things should happen at regular intervals because maybe that's how the plots in movies work.
Oh, yeah. Thinking of ourselves as the protagonist in a story, in a success story about an author or an artist, right? That's
Right.
probably a problem. But
Right,
again,
right. So
where
yeah,
do,
some of this
where
is
do,
like, is this an expectation or a delusion? But
yeah,
and sometimes those can be helpful. Like I'm not knocking like having a crazy dream because I feel like a lot of times, why not? Like what else are you gonna do? Positive thinking, a lot of people say that can influence outcomes.
Mhm.
Even if that's not true, you probably feel better moment to moment if you're expecting good things to happen or kind of looking for your silver lining. But one of the first things I thought about time is the medium of possibility. Maria riffed on that, was like deadlines, very helpful. And then also if you have a date on the calendar, like a dentist appointment, you're like, my comic will be born on this date. It's like waiting for a baby. It's gonna happen. And maybe it's early and probably gonna be a little late, but it's there on the calendar waiting to happen. So, but also, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough time. I don't when I make stuff, but like giving yourself time to put the pencil to the page and make the thing, but also give yourself time to have a certain number of feelings about it, or more expectations, or editing your expectations and to make the next thing. Like there's like a little, what's nice about making something is it's not um one chance, that's why we have
Right.
erasers. Right, or like a more paper, get a lot of paper, get extra erasers, and just sit with yourself. But giving yourself more time usually yields good results, but like just give some space in your heart to not put so much pressure on yourself.
And I think related to that is make small things, because it's very easy to finish one. And then all the things you wish you'd done on that one, you can do on the next one. Um, it's just so easy to learn in a sort of like cycle like that, I think. And if learning is your objective and learning is your goal, doing that on a short cycle like that is great. Um,
Yeah.
and then all those feelings where you're like, oh, I should have drawn more backgrounds, or I should have like, I should have used a different tool or whatever. Then the next time you do it, so long as we have a little bit of free time, a little bit more in our near future, the same amount maybe as we have now, there will be a next time, and there'll be another project, and and it's so great to devote some of the energy you have to artistic practices. They're so nourishing and delightful.
I'm picturing how like almost like a wide shot silent movie sort of setup where it's like Tom and he walks up to this grand piano and he presses one note and goes, "Oh no," and then walks away and never plays piano again. I used to go to my neighbor's house. I lived for free in a very small 200 square foot apartment when I was adjuncting at the School of Visual Arts with my friends and working on my graphic novel. They didn't charge me anything for rent, and they're a few decades older than me. But I used to go upstairs. In addition to like not paying rent, they would feed me often, and I would come up for dinner. And sometimes I would pull my weight and go to the grocery store and bring home ingredients, but we'd go through the same kind of recipes some of the time. And every time my friend Richard would cook, we'd sit down to eat it and we'd genuinely enjoy it. And then we'd start talking about it. He's like, I think I want to add more lemon zest next time, or a little bit more saffron. So he wasn't super critical. There was a little bit of a critical edge to it, but there was curiosity, and we were thinking and talking out loud about the true artists. Also, they're visual artists. So we're sitting around eating risotto or something, and we're like, yeah, what is it missing? It's so good, but salt? I don't know. Ooh, lime juice would be good. It's always some like random thing. So they weren't like super duper foodies, but I always thought that was really great that there would be a next time that I could come to dinner again and try his next attempt, because it was already delicious. I was like, oh man, I can't wait. So inviting your friends into your like, here's how it went, and I think this is what I want to do next time. We're all excited to read it and read volume two. So we're all sitting at the table together.
Next dinner, next. So one thing I want to talk about too. So when we talk about expectations, it's a lot about wanting to do it the way we've seen it done, right? A certain kind of book, a certain kind of storytelling style, a certain drawing style. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when we quote fail to live up to that, which I pretty much have done almost always, um, that's when that real like malaise and disappointment sets in, right? And so how do we navigate that, and how do we transmute that? Because again, I want to say it's never been a easier time to be an artist. It's never been easier to create something and share it. It's a really amazing time. And but again, so many of us come in with these expectations that it's got to be done a certain way, and it's not true. And it's a vestige of the 20th century, which is of course a vestige of everything prior to it, where there were more gatekeepers and there were more limits to publishing and there were more limits to distribution. And you did have to play by the rules, you know.
Yeah, I think the limits to making sharing and making and distributing work sort of more democratic, that you can do it in an instant. Anyone can do it now. If you get like got Wi-Fi and a piece of paper, you're ready to go and you can become a superstar. Is that I think also gatekeeping has become spread across the board too, where now we're all like, oh, there's a comment section. Oh, good. Like the people can leap in and pass judgment and help you or not help you, or you know, whatever. There's that famous quote by I don't know if it's famous, but I feel like Tom and I always say it to each other. Ira Glass's quote about like expectations, I guess. Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. He calls it taste. But there is a gap. For the first couple of years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good, it has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. Like, you know what you want it to look like. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase and they quit. And most
Right.
people that Ira Glass knows who does, you know, people that do interesting creative work went through years of this. And we know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. And if you're just starting out or you're still in this phase, you have to know this is normal. And the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work and put yourself on a deadline. He loves a deadline. So that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And it took longer to I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You've just got to fight your way through. But I'm like, maybe I've been swimming in the deep end and my muscles are sore, and I'm like, why fight it? I'll just be like not that great. This is nice.
Why fight
Uh,
it?
like Iris, like fight your way through and become great. And I'm like just almost there, but I'm also like, it's cozy here.
My muscles are sore. Why fight it? Yeah, no, all right. No, I think that's a great place to sort of pivot towards the end of this episode, right? Which is that you know, and again, our that's our podcast title. The Terrible Anvil comes from setting those deadlines and getting better and knowing who you are as an artist and crafting that and honing that as a result of those frequent deadlines. And that's great. I want people to have high expectations for themselves. Actually, Justine Anderson, my co-teacher at SOF for so many years, we were always on the opposite end of this because we had to be, right? Well, she wasn't going to change, so I had to take the other position. Like so I was like, all right, I'll play the easygoing cop. You play the mean cop. But she was always like, I am here to help you surpass your expectations because surpass your limits. She says, your idea of who you can be is limited. You can be better than that. That's a life goal for her. Like she believes that so strongly. And so I was like, okay, I'll just tell everybody that it's all okay. Everything's gonna be okay. And they're just beautiful who they are, which I believe. But I also believe that there's a great value in expanding who we are, right? And expanding our potential, and expanding what it is we can do with the time and body that we're given on this planet, right? So yeah, push those expectations just a little. See if you can make little baby steps past them. No,
Maybe my
be easy to go
expectations are like really low because I don't know if I have expectations of like, wow, I could do this, and then I'm sort of impressed. I think I'm like, wow, I'm still doing this. Like I'm hanging in there. Like I feel like I'm in like the ninth round of a knockout fight, and I'm like just totally battered, but like, hey, I made it pretty far. Like Rocky at the end of Rocky. I'm like, well, I did it. I look like hell. That's an expectation and a surprise, but so sometimes that can be interesting if you're like, wow, I never thought I'd make it this far, or I didn't even think I could keep spending the time I've been spending on this.
Yeah. Or look at this. I made 2 books or 3 booklets, or, or 20 people have read this. And all I had to do was like push a little bit harder than I had been pushing, right? Because I hadn't like, maybe I never made a book before, but now it's a year later and I have. And some people have read it. And that's like, and if you look back, like, wow, so much has changed. And now I have a new expectation or a new goal, let's say. Um, and I can make a slightly larger book, or I can make 2 of that same type, or I can change it up a little and try again in a different way because I liked how that went. But some other things are lurking that I'm really curious about. There are any number of goals to set. And all of this is about expanding our vision of ourselves, our understanding of ourselves, and having reasonable expectations about that. It sort of comes when we have some clarity about what it is we're doing and who we are.
Is it so at the top of our podcast, Tom said, one piece of advice you can carry with you on expectations is to lower them. And I myself am wondering, are mine too low? So like, is there such thing as too low of an expectation? I find it might be a bit of armor for myself if I expect things to just not even manifest. I'm like, oh, there's no way I could do this. And I do it. I'm like, son of a gun. Look at that. It's been stick figures right on that piece of paper. Um,
But
is it possible to have it too low to sell yourself short? I don't know. What do you think, Tom? Should I have higher expectations?
well, you personally, Jess, are trained in a number of ways. Not only do you have a BFA and an MFA from respectable schools, which at the very least meant you could show up, right? You could show up and get a good attendance. But you also, I've seen you train yourself with these these very quick portraits of which you did like 100 of them or something in a very rapid style. Um, you also made a large number of nonfiction comics, which were kind of self-created, right? So you set yourself up with a lot of goals, all that you wanted to meet. And that sort of created the Jess Rollifson who's here now. And the Jess Rollifson who's here now, again, you brought this up early on, has a baseline. Like shitty Jess Rollifson is going to be pretty good. You know, like Jess Rollifson, whose muscles are tired, is still going to be really wonderful. So, but that's because you past Jess has given current Jess a lot of gifts by having done that work. So what we owe it to our future selves is like be reasonable about our expectation, set goals we can hit that will challenge ourselves, and that will help create the person we'll be in the future.
I
So
also
that
think
we, so that we can rest in the
yeah, yeah, take a break. We should have an episode about naps. They're very important. Oh yeah, something we left out of our tabling episode a few a few weeks. Was it last week or it must have been last week? Yeah, you just went to Mocha, right? Tom and I forgot to tell you when you go to a convention, especially if you're working behind a table, eat a sandwich at one point in your day. They're very important sandwiches. I prefer mine on a bagel because bagels are always good at Mocha. Not in Mocha, but around there. There's always a good bagel in New York. But um, man, I was gonna say something else. I don't know, like expecting. Sometimes I think I sell myself a little short, and my expectations are a little low. But I will get so excited if I read a motivational quote. I am like the biggest sucker for like just some epic maybe not the Ira Glass quote, but that one's pretty good. But by the end of it, I'm like, yeah, get really juiced up. And I'm like, I can do it. But it's not something that comes from within where I'm like, I could definitely do that. I know that I can do it, but I'm like, oh, I know that's going to be ridiculous. Like, but I think maybe that feels protective and safe to come from my baseline of like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be weird. I'm going to do this and I'm going to get to the end of it and it's not going to be pretty. I mentioned this on another podcast, but the competitive baking show nailed it with Nicole Byer, stand-up comedian, and Jacques Torres, famous French chocolatier. It's comical. It's the opposite of a real quote unquote baking show. It's not the Great British Baking Show. Everyone that shows up is like, I love cupcakes and I've made them twice. And then they have to do these elaborate, insane 4-tiered cakes with fondant. And then you see big sample photo, and then they have to stand next to their work, and they've put like dry spaghetti on it and done all kinds of crazy things, and it's kind of magical. So maybe it's not quite that bad, but I'm maybe it's hopefully it's a little bit better than that. And deadlines can make your stuff look a certain way. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about.
Tight deadlines on that show. Very tight.
Yes, it's almost not enough time,
Right.
and sometimes I'll intentionally, maybe that's why we procrastinate too. If I force myself to only give myself a certain amount of time, hopefully it's enough time to accomplish the task that's next, but also I have to go at a certain speed that I'm not normally accustomed to, and that prevents me from slowing down so much that I stop. I don't know, that's weird.
Did I tell you about the satirical cartoon character called Deadline from Glenn Dakin from the 80s? It's just a silly
Yeah.
little book, a silly little character in a comic book, but uh it was a comic book that didn't even have any superheroes, but it did have one. In case anybody needed anything done, they would hire this guy named Deadline, and he was this massive guy. And
Deadline.
his job, he said, I can accomplish any task so long as I'm given a ridiculously short amount of time to do it. And so they'd say, like, you know, and it would be like, can you go get this 500-pound box from, uh, from New Zealand and bring it back to us um, by midday tomorrow? And he's like, that's way too much time. and then they'd say, okay, how about by 12? He's like, okay, I do it. And then he would strap a sleeping scorpion to the side of his head and say, this scorpion is designed will wake up in 4 hours and sting me to death unless I've achieved my goal. And then he does it. So it's a cartoon. It's funny, but
That's
I
amazing.
but I love that idea that, like, unless I'm given an impossibly short amount of time to do it, I won't get it done. But give me an impossibly
Yeah,
short.
so constraints, deadlines, something, yeah, maybe blossom into that. There's no way it could be done. Like maybe I'm double daring myself. I'm double dog dare you to try to make that comic. Hold
Um,
my beverage.
do you want to mention what Adrian said above in the chat? I think she says, I think it's only too low, our expectations, if we stop with gas still in our tank. That's a great phrase. And I'm sensing, Jess, that that's part of what's going on with you. I think you're like, I think there's gas sloshing around in there, but anyway. And then Adrian continues, but again, the feeling of accomplishment is what we're chasing. Our brains need regular infusions of that kind of dopamine to bring us through long projects. Yeah, I think that's true too. You know, um, so that's a great thing to have self-awareness about. It's like, how much how much of a thrill am I going to get by achieving some goals? How much of a thrill am I going to get by pushing some boundaries, some personal boundaries and personal goals? And is it worth chasing that thrill, that small thrill? Other people climb mountains and kill things or whatever. And we're just like, what if you just like drew a little bit better, or whatever, or like did 2 pages instead of one, or, you know, but it's still a thrill. There's a real thrill to like achieving, pushing yourself past what you thought you could do.
Yes. And I was lamenting a little bit in we have the year-long program at SAW, plug, plug, plug. I'm lucky enough to mentor a small group of about 12 cartoonists this semester, and their last semester, and they're working on a roughly 6-page comic. And I was like, the trouble with like building a comics curriculum where you're like, here is a quarter or a semester and a certain number of weeks, a certain number of pages. At first you make a script and then you thumbnail and then you pencil and then you ink and you might color, do post-production, whatever. So there's certain steps like you're building a birdhouse or something. But a lot of times when we make comics, the pictures and the words kind of come all at once. And you're like, do I draw first? Do I write first? Okay, I'll start drawing the margins and then I'll cobble it together. And it feels sort of wild and wacky. But having that sort of regimented structure of a class, let's say, even if it's just like a short-term class that meets once a week and you do figure drawing or something like that, like this will all be over in a few weeks.
Oh yeah.
But you have to do the thing, and you're like, there's no way I can do it. There's this gap. It kind of reminds me of the gap that Ira Glass talks about, where it's like, and of course the people that administer curriculum, like Tom and I, are like, it's no problem. Week 1, we're just gonna do this. I am. And I think the same thing happens when I work with a client and they're like, okay, so just deliver the pencils on this date. I'm like, oh, okay, I will. Like, There's like no way. Like I feel like it's there's that scene in The Princess Bride where Wallace Shawn is like impossible, or he says like he says some other word. That's the wrong word, but
Inconceivable.
inconceivable. Yes, it's inconceivable. I feel like Wallace Shawn in the Princess Bride. I almost said Bridesmaids. I was like, Wallace Shawn was not in Bridesmaids, but I would have watched that.
So did we talk about goals interchangeably with expectations in this episode? Did we talk about expectations in the way that you feel like we covered the correct ground? I'm,
I
I'm
think
finding down if it's not obvious because it's
yeah, yeah. Tom's like, can we get out of here? I have to have lunch. Yes, I think so. Yeah, and just like our goals slash expectations, maybe they're interchangeable. Like what feels inevitable to you or what feels possible to you. And maybe you're more like healthily narcissistic, for lack of a better word, and you're like, it's inevitable that I'm gonna rock this and it's gonna go
Hmm.
awesome. This is probably not the podcast for you. We're here for the overthinkers. But both can be true. And certainly it's
Yeah.
funny when I think one aspect of making comics, I'm like, let's say the pencils. I'll have pencils and I'll be like, okay, next step is inking. I think that panel is gonna go, it's gonna take like 2 seconds. And then panel two is gonna take a long time. And it's always the opposite. It's like the thing that I thought was gonna, I had the expectation of something going quickly goes slow, and vice versa. The thing I thought would be really hard is a little bit softer around the edges than I thought it would be. So there's the scale of expectations too. There's things from moment to moment, and then there's big things like, why hasn't Oprah read my book yet? So, and then did we talk about normalizing mediocrity? I feel like that's just what I always land on at the end
I
of
think
every
you
episode.
do mention that a lot with
But Tom was like, make sure you're still awesome though. Like maybe normalize I don't know. I just feel like a lot of our culture is like hustle and ambition based, and that is really magical. But I think we also like just devalue our labor is devalued anyway. But like, I don't
well,
know. I just want to root for the people that always have a bad day. I'm like, you're doing it.
I hope Meg will write that down. Um, uh, well, mediocrity is a kind of a joke word, right?
Right.
We're using it to mean um something that I think is authentic. I think there's an authenticity that I value and a search for clarity, a search for connection, and in the polish of a certain kind of act, which again, I'm speaking very abstractly, but like, our art making in many media have been ossified for hundreds of years and reached a point in the 20th century where it's like, this is what music is, and this is what comics are, and this is, art forms always change a little bit, but in the past 20 years, all the art forms have changed a lot, a lot. Um, I mean, the fact that people watch videos vertically is insane to me, like on their phones, and they're watching them vertically. I'm like, that's not how you watch anything. You watch it horizontally, So even that, a simple change like that. My point being is that we categorize our efforts based on the long history of art making, but we've got this chance now to make things just based from that authentic place, from a shared place, again, from a search for clarity. And what we make, I don't know, it might come out looking strange to some eyes. It might come out looking beautiful to other eyes. And I think we need to find those people. And mediocre is the funny word for it right now, right? Oh, it's mediocre, but I don't know, maybe there's a better word for it.
I wish I could think of a very clever pun that's like more like meaty awesome, but I'm gonna work on that
1
for
1
next.
a.m. it'll come. You can text me at 1 a.m.
Yeah, I'll text Tom and we'll get it together. I don't want to get too into the weeds and I know we have to leave, but like everyone can make art now, and that I don't know if that's always been the case. It used to be kind of a closed door society, and gatekeepers aren't really that helpful most of the time. But sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like my mother-in-law's drawing is like pretty good. And I'm like, I wasted 6 years in art school. Like, what did I do? She's like, I think the secret to making good art is like retiring as early as you can and squirreling away money and staying healthy. Like I was like, damn, So anyone can like hop on the internet and make a podcast, for example. Like
Right,
this is not
right.
high art. So it is really thrilling, but also like it might get under your skin. You're like, well, if anyone can do it, what makes good art great, or what will make my stuff kind of rise above that stuff? But I seldom think that like our lofty expectations of what you should make art look like is the thing that like gets you to that place you want to be at.
Say that last sentence again. You
I don't
rarely
know what I said.
you rarely think that our lofty
This is why we have a note taker, Tom. We just free form blah blah blahing. Oh, it's
yeah.
just like yeah, like I don't think our expectations for if they serve any purpose, I don't think like you from the outset you're like this is how it's gonna happen, and then you're like, ding, I made it because I thought that I like it was gonna happen the way I thought it was gonna happen, or it had to look a certain way. Like I don't know if that's what I
There's
mean.
such a joy. Look, I'm going to say this firsthand because I spent the last year not drawing and trying an art form I'm not good at. So I'm going to say right there, right flat out, that there's such a joy in not knowing and being surprised by outcomes, and um you can have that, and then I don't know. I end there because it's not a big enough goal for some people. It's like I don't just want to be surprised by my outcomes. It's like I want to actually say this thing that's on my mind, or I want to tell this story, and
It's a
that's a different
little boring if everything goes exactly the way you planned, because
that's
there are
sort
things in my life that have gone well, and I'm like, I mean, I'm
mm.
happy, but like, what else? Like, what's the catch, or is there something else? Like, so I don't know. Maybe it's a little more immersive to have other things come up.
Some sort of balance can be found between like I know exactly how this is going to go, and I'm going to do it exactly, and it's going to be exactly right, and not exactly sure how this is going to go. I'm going to try my best and bring my authentic self or whatever, and just see what happens. There's some sort of balance in between those two things for sure.
Should we end there? That sounds great.
I think
Go
so.
for it and be the authentic thing you want to see in the world.
All right, this one's another one for the vault. Um, I want to thank everybody in the chat. The chat's really great today. There's a lot of people. Maria says, "Thanks. I'm off to go be authentic." Anita says, "Perfection is boring." That's totally true. Anyway, so thanks to everybody in the chat, and thanks to Meg for note taking. And we will post this in podcast form and on YouTube pretty soon in the next week. Jess, anything else you want to say? I'm really excited about your book.
Um, eat your vegetables. Everybody go take a nap. You're working too hard.
All right. Well, thanks,
We'll
Jess.
see you next week, right? Oh, and also if you're here, you probably already know our new showtime is 1 p.m. instead of 11 a.m. So if you didn't know that and you're listening to this,
Eastern. And you had a topic for next week. What was it?
I did. Oh, let me see. Let me see. 1 second. 1 second. I
All
have
right.
a.
I'll do the Jeff song. Do-do-do.
I made a list. I
So
think we
Jess
have.
actually mapped out the remaining 10 episodes or something
I
like
have
that.
expectations for our episodes. Uh-oh. Episode 11, background music, drawing location and setting. When you strongly
Oh,
dislike drawing location and setting. So we're talking about backgrounds on March 28th. Can't wait to see you.
all right. Back to details and brass tacks.
Back to the. Okay, all right. I'm getting out of here.
All right. Bye, Jess. See you next
Thanks,
week. Thanks,
bye.
everybody. Thank
Thank
you.
y'all.
Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.